Hi guys, my name is Borrodante. Today let's render this guy. So this is a random character that I just did a few days ago while I had like a free minute. I thought it was turning out somewhat interesting, but I think we should play around more with this character to make it look somewhat more decent and to make sense. And for that, we're gonna be doing some work on making it more three-dimensional. Maybe, I'm not sure, but right now the whole thing feels kind of flat looking. But also, I really want to make this video about using references to make the picture look better than it would without it. Like pushing your artwork further using references. So we're gonna be using references for the foliage in the back, because right now I'm not exactly sure how I would actually render it. And the second thing, we're gonna be using certain photos of like cotton bags and some kind of objects made of straws. I'm not sure how that thing is called even in Russian, but we should find a proper material for this guy. Thing is, this is some kind of like a totem, some kind of doll or I don't know, well, a totem made by some kind of tribal people. They were worshipping this and it kind of came alive. This is the basic idea, not exactly a story, but just to make it clear what kind of a character this is. This is some kind of just a shape made of something tribal-ish materials, and that it just came alive, basically. So yeah, let's go ahead and look up some references for the foliage and for this material of the character, and then move on with searching the shape better and applying the things we will discover in the references. So I'm gonna be looking up the photos on Google, and I'm gonna be doing it right here, so you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, I think I'm done looking for everything I am gonna need. So for the foliage, I came up with the search request jungle trees foliage sunny, and I found some of the pictures like this. The most interesting part for me is around here. The average kind of looking, dense, somewhat uninteresting and realistic grass or leaves lit from the top and what exactly they look like. And this one also. Then I looked up with the words old cotton sack fabric torn to find something like this, so the word sack and torn kinda helped. And in addition to the sack fabric, I also looked up some hay braided fence, which wasn't exactly something I was looking for, but close enough. I think we'll be able to extract some of the reference material out of these elements in here, avoiding the watermarks. So yeah, that's about it. Let me just drop all of this into REFS, which is a program to quickly look at all of the reference pictures you want on one screen. Okay, let's put you right over here. So I have all the references right here. So let's start with actual foliage stuff, I guess, just to test drive the whole reference application. I don't really do that a lot, and I just wanted to apply that because without references, this picture may turn out really boring and uninteresting and just lame and wrong unless we play properly with the materials and the foliage. So yeah, right now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and try to turn this foliage into more of a simplified stroke-based shape, which is what you should do when you're using references, especially when you're using references of some kind of complex mass like this. Foliage is a perfect example. You should process it in your head and not exactly perfectly copy the spots from the photo, but actually make sense out of them into the painting logic, applying certain brushwork and the dynamics of the brush flow so it would all make sense. We should look for common shapes based on the contrast and somewhat segregate shadow areas from the lit areas to make more sense out of them. to make them look more impressive, which is something I'm really curious in practicing, and I haven't really done that yet. So this is the main little key thing that this video is gonna be about. So I'm gonna go ahead and try for a little while to make this work. Have no idea what's gonna happen, but yeah, let's do that. So I started doing something after analyzing some photos, and the first thing I decided to change is the exposure of the sky. I went from this unrealistically convenient, just dark blue color to an actually overexposed, basically white color with this super highly saturated cyan color next to the trees. And that is based on this reference right here. As you can see, the sky is white right here, but next to the trees where the sky itself, the color of the sky blends with the color of the darker leaves, it kind of shows its blue color because it's sort of getting darker for the camera. That's the photo effect that you can witness when something overly bright gets semi-covered by something dark. You can actually see its actual color and not just see its overexposed white appearance. Same thing goes here, like generally the sky is really white, but where there's a lot of leaves covering it, there's a lot of blue we can see all over the place. So basically, sky creates kind of a bright blue aura around all the objects, if those objects are darker than the sky. But yeah, the main point about it, not the blue area is really important, but the fact that the sky should actually be overexposed. We shouldn't at all see the sky like this if we really want to see some details inside of the foliage. If we would make the exposure of the camera dark enough to see the blue sky like this, that means that the whole foliage and the character would be even darker than that, and they would be basically black silhouettes. Because the sky is actually way brighter than anything that's not actually emitting light. So in order to see everything exposed like this, bright enough like this, we need to overexpose the sky. Otherwise it doesn't look realistic. So that's the logic behind it. So I start with that, and also I start kind of looking at the references, and right now what I'm doing is I'm analyzing, for instance, the series of spots, these super bright spots of leaves, and what kind of shape they create. Not the specific super highly defined shape as we can see in the photo, but just kind of like these spots, how exactly they jump around. And as you can see, I don't make them as overexposed as they are in the picture here. I'm kind of making the exposure a bit lower so the foliage at least wouldn't be overexposed, only the sky. Because after all, we are overall in the sunny area of the island or whatever, so most of the objects will be lit by the skylight. Contrary to what we see here, this picture is taken in the shadowy area of the forest. So we need to see these details in here, which are not lit by the sky and are pretty much really dark areas in the shadow of the forest. So in order to see this, the photographer had to overexpose this sunny foliage in this sunny spot right here. We don't have to do that. We can actually adjust our exposure for the sunlit foliage right here, so it will be green. That's like one of the main things that we also have to think about when we render something. Number one is, what is the light in the scene? Like, where is the light source? In this case, it's somewhere at the top, so the shadow is dead underneath the character, so everything is just lit from the top. That's number one. And number two, we have to think through where is the exposure of our eyes, of our camera, or whatever our painting is. Like, what will be overexposed and what won't be overexposed and will be seen with the correct color of the object, and what would be underexposed, meaning what would hit black color. In this case, the shadows in the armpits and between the legs of the character, and somewhere in the darker areas of the forest right here, there will also be black color, but I'll blend it a bit with the air perspective, so it won't be exactly black, kind of like grayed out black, but still close to that. So yeah, moving on with the details and whatnot. Okay, I think I'm done with the main spotty composition of the foliage and the environment in general. Kinda like it a lot. The main change I did, well, everything is different, but the main change is that I added some of the foliage in the front plane, making the character not standing somewhere in the beach next to the maybe like a seashore or whatever, and having the whole jungle part in the back like a flat background. So now this tribal totem god thing is standing in the middle of the jungle, which is a lot more immersive and cool, and a lot more three-dimensional, because we have some of the objects in front of the main thing. So that always works great. Also, I added quite a lot of exposure to the sandy ground around the character, so it's now also a lot brighter. Which makes sense. If the light hits the character, it hits the sand around him, and the sand is pretty bright, so it should be also brighter than the foliage that is lit by this thing. So we may even go brighter than this. It makes sense. Grass is usually darker than the sand, so yeah, we'll do that later on. So I'm thinking this is getting relatively massive, meaning I'm actually very involved in this, and I think I'll finish working on the foliage right now, and there will be a part 2 where we work on the character the same way. So yeah, about the foliage, let's talk about how exactly I did it. So I was looking at all of these random patterns that I was trying to make sense out of, and they're pretty messed up. Like, all the leaves, it's bad enough that there's so much of them and they're so small. They're also covering up each other in such a random fashion that there's not a single bit of the leaf that is just a perfect leaf. Everything is just covering up each other so strongly. So what I did is I kind of looked at this as at this kind of pattern like here, and I was just trying to see this general pattern of what kind of bright spots and what kind of dark spots we see when we look at this kind of foliage. So I was just copying that. Obviously the amount of detail is far from the amount that we need for this picture to look in any way finalized. But what's interesting, what I started doing in the latest part is I started like introducing some blending. If you haven't noticed, I actually paint in dry mode today, meaning I turned off any blending in the brush. So everything is basically the way generic color brush in Photoshop works, so no blending. But at the final stage right now, before I started talking, I used some of the blender to just blend away the details, like in here. These leaves, they look pretty cool. Thing is, I worked on a lot of these random spots, but they don't make a lot of sense as actual foliage. And the scale of these leaves is pretty big, so we need to introduce actual separate leaves somewhere, so it would actually give the viewer a hint that this whole mess is actually leaves. So we introduce some of these separate leaves in different spots, like here, here, over here, especially in the foreground. We need to make sure because those leaves are pretty big. So everywhere I started introducing some of the smaller leaves and smaller shadow shapes of the leaves on all the branches. In the forest, not a single branch will ever have a soft lighting on it. There's always a whole bunch of tiny shadows from the leaves. But when I introduce them somewhere where there's a high contrast, it kind of looks like, especially the part where the leaf starts, it looks like it's a flat shape that is segregated from whatever is behind it. So I started blending away some of the elements, and it kind of makes them dive into the actual color surrounding of any shape like this. So even in here, it kind of looks cool, but still segregated, and I will blend away some of the details like this. And it will bring just the illusion of the richness of the lighting, meaning, okay, we can now see how this is softly going away into the shadow, and that's the illusion that is more than enough for the human eye to be totally cool with it. Like, it starts to look like something decent, actually full color image with shadow and light. So right now, since I don't want to work too much. I don't want to work too hard on this foliage. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna sort of blend away all these big details so they would just look not as rough and unrealistic and flat for the eye. So blending away some of the edges, not all of them, in each of these sharp strokes, only one of the edges should blend away in certain way. Like, you just have to make a decision. This is like a design kind of puzzle here. Wow, I really blended away this area to demonstrate something or whatever. I don't know, I missed this part, but yeah, something like this. And now back to blending, doing this stuff. Anywhere where these strokes look like just some kind of super flat shapes that don't have any beginning or end, it should kind of like dive away into the environment, and that's why we blend these details. And it especially makes sense for the background, because in background there's so much more details that we can ever actually show with brush strokes. There are like infinity amount of tiny leaves and tiny shadows on each leaf, so it's so much more than we can paint. So we just blend away. By blending away, we kind of tell the eye that there is just so much going on that don't even bother to look into it. This is just blurry. It's not defined. There's a lot more complexity than the stroke can show, and it's really necessary to go blurry there. Not blurry, actually blended away. And somewhere where it just turns into a completely boring, blurry spot like this area. I didn't work at all on this area, so on top I'll go ahead and define some more of the separate leaves to make it look more like it actually makes sense, like an actual leaf thing. Oh, also, the thing with the blue aura around everything, you can see, like, in many places I went with a lot brighter aura instead of this super vibrant one. I went a lot brighter from here to here because the aura of something really bright around something that is darker, the aura itself shouldn't be darker than this darker object. And right now it's like, you can see how the exposure is basically the same. It's just different colors, but they have the same brightness, which makes no sense. If we're blending into such a bright sky, this blending color should also be a lot brighter, like it should be halfway in brightness to the completely bright sky we have in here. So I mostly should just replace this super saturated blue with this a lot brighter blue for this aura effect, like that. And yeah, in the deeper forest part, where there's just a whole lot of really dark branches and leaves, and the sky is behind those, that's where we actually can keep this super saturated blue, because this saturated blue is way brighter than all these other objects that are blending into it, so it makes sense to have such a saturated color here. The stronger the contrast, the stronger is the saturation of the color in the photo effect in between. Same goes for the translucency effect, when we have to make a really bright one side and really dark opposite side to have some really saturated translucency in between. So that's the same thing. Same logic goes everywhere. I hope I'm making sense. I'm talking so much today. But yeah, trust me, I'm onto something. So yeah, I'll blend around a little bit and then we'll wrap up this part and move on to the next one. Okay, I think we're done with the background. Looks much better with all the blending and whatnot. Had to do some surgery on this area because it didn't really follow the whole idea with the random spots that you apply to the canvas first that I was talking about. So I kind of like changed it to make it look more appropriate spot wise, and then worked into some of the details with the separate leaves. So yeah, now everything looks much more interesting. We'll probably add a bit more work to the foliage in the second part of this episode, but generally I think we're kind of done. So yeah guys, share some thoughts on this stage of the work, ask questions in the comments if something wasn't clear about what I was talking about, so we could move on to the second part of this. And I thank you for watching if you did. I guess you did if you're here. Leave a like and subscribe. Tell a friend. Look for the bigger shapes. Do whatever you want. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. Oh my god, this looks symmetrically horrifying.